Dove Books on Tape presents The Princess Bride by William Goldman. It's 1941, autumn. I'm a little cranky because my radio won't get the football games. I lie back listening to the soaps, and after a while I try finding Northwestern versus Notre Dame, and my stupid radio will pick up every Chicago station except the one carrying the game. It was so frustrating. I was lying there sweating, and my stomach felt crazy, and I was pounding the top of the radio to make it work right. And that was how they discovered I was delirious with pneumonia. Pneumonia today is not what it once was, especially when I had it. 10 days or so in the hospital and then home for a long recuperating period. I was just this lump going through a strength-gathering time, which is how you have to think of me when I came upon The Princess Bride. It was my first night home. Drain, still one sick cookie. My father came in. I thought to say good night. He sat on the end of my bed. "Chapter 1, The Bride," he said. It was only then that I kind of looked up and saw he was holding a book. I said, "Huh? What? I didn't hear." "Chapter 1, The Bride." He held up the book then. "I'm reading it to you for Relax, by S. Morgenstern, great Florinese writer, The Princess Bride." "Has it got any sports in it?" "Fencing, fighting, torture, poison, true love, hate, revenge, giants, hunters, bad men, good men, beautiful ladies." "Sounds okay," I said, and I kind of closed my eyes. "I'll do my best to stay awake, but I'm awfully sleepy, Daddy." Who can know when his world is going to change? Who can tell before it happens that every prior experience, all the years, were a preparation for nothing? Picture this now, an all but illiterate old man struggling with an enemy tongue, an all but exhausted young boy fighting against sleep. Who could suspect that in the morning a different child would awake? Even a week later, I was not aware of what had begun that night. The doors that were slamming shut while others slid into the clear. Perhaps I should have at least known something, but maybe not. Who can sense revelation in the wind? What happened was just this. I got hooked on the story. For the first time in my life, I became actively interested in a book. Me, the sports fanatic. Me, the game freak. Me, the only 10-year-old in Illinois with a hate-on for the alphabet, wanted to know what happened next. I got hooked on the story. My whole life really began with my father reading me the Morgenstern when I was 10. And long before I was ever married, I knew I was going to share it with my son. So when Jason was born, I made a mental note to buy him a copy of The Princess Bride for his 10th birthday. Flash forward, Jason's 10th birthday. Supper time Thursday. My son Jason was piling mashed potatoes on his plate. "I really loved the book, Dad. It was great." "What was your favorite part?" "Chapter 1, The Bride," Jason said. "Well, how about the climb up the cliffs of insanity?" I said. "That's in Chapter 5. "Oh, great," Jason said. "And that description of Prince Humperdinck's Zoo of Death, that's in the 2nd chapter. "Oh, even greater," Jason said. What knocked me out about it, I said, was that it's this very short little passage on the Zoo of Death, but yet somehow you just know it's going to figure in later. Did you get that same feeling? "Mm-hmm," Jason nodded. "Great." But then I knew he hadn't read it. "He tried to read it," my wife Helen cut in. "He did read the 1st chapter. Chapter 2 was impossible for him, so when he'd made a sufficient and reasonable attempt, I told him to stop. Different people have different tastes. I told him you'd understand, Willie." Of course I understood. I felt just so deserted, though. How could he not like it? I went to the library, closed myself in, hunted out The Princess Bride. I flicked to the title page, and right there it said, S. Morgenstern's Classic Tale of True Love and High Adventure. You had to admire a guy who called his own new book a classic before it was published and anyone else had a chance to read it. I skimmed the 1st chapter, and it was pretty much exactly as I remembered. Then I turned to the 2nd chapter, the one about Prince Humperdinck and the little kind of tantalizing description of the Zoo of Death. That's when I began to realize the problem. Morgenstern wasn't writing any children's book. He was writing a kind of satiric history on his country and the decline of the monarchy of Western civilization. But my father only read me the action stuff, the good parts. He never bothered with the serious side at all. About 2 in the morning, I called Hiram at Martha's Vineyard. Hiram Hayden's been my editor for a dozen years, and we've been through a lot together, but never any phone calls at 2 in the morning. "Hey, Hiram," I began after about 6 rings. Listen, you guys published a book just after World War I. Do you think it might be a good idea for me to abridge it and we'd republish it now? I just used the good parts. Call you tomorrow about the specifics, okay? Could you make it a little earlier in the business day, Bill? I laughed and we hung up. The abridgment got done and you're about to hear it. The good parts version. I know I don't expect this to change anybody else's life the way it altered mine. But take the title words, True Love and High Adventure. I believed that once. I thought my life was going to follow that path. Prayed that it would. Obviously it didn't, but I don't think there's high adventure left anymore. Nobody takes out a sword nowadays and cries, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." Anyway, here's the good parts version. S. Morgenstern wrote it, and my father read it to me. And now I give it to you. What you do with it will be of more than passing interest to us all. The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure. The good parts version, abridged by William Goldman. The year that Buttercup was born, the most beautiful woman in the world was a French scullery maid named Annette. Annette worked in Paris for the Duke and Duchess de Guiche, and it did not escape the Duke's notice that someone extraordinary was polishing the pewter. The Duke's notice did not escape the notice of the Duchess either, who was not very beautiful but plenty smart. The Duchess set about studying Annette and shortly found her adversary's tragic flaw. Chocolate. Armed now, the Duchess set to work. The Palace de Guiche turned into a candy castle. There were piles of chocolate-covered mints in the drawing rooms, baskets of chocolate-covered nougats in the parlors. Annette never had a chance. Inside a season, she went from delicate to whopping, and the Duke never glanced in her direction without sad bewilderment clouding his eyes. Buttercup at 15 knew none of this, and if she had, she would have found it totally unfathomable. She was not the most beautiful woman in the world, but she was in the top 20, and that primarily on potential. Certainly not on any particular care she took of herself. She hated to wash her face. She loathed the area behind her ears. She was sick of combing her hair. What she liked to do was ride her horse and taunt the farm boy. The horse's name was Horse. Buttercup was never long on imagination, and it came when she called it, and it did what she told it. The farm boy did what she told him, too. Actually, he was more a young man now, but he had been a farm boy when, orphaned, he had come to work for her father, and Buttercup referred to him that way still. "Farm boy, fetch me this. Get me that, farm boy. Quickly, you lazy thing. Trot now, or I'll tell father." "As you wish." That was all he ever answered. "As you wish." He lived in a hovel out near the animals, and according to Buttercup's mother, he kept it clean. He even read when he had candles. When Buttercup was almost 17, a man in a carriage came to town and watched as she rode for provisions. Other men had gone out of their way to catch sight of her. Other men had even ridden 20 miles for the privilege, as this man had. The importance here is that this was the first rich man who had bothered to do so. And it was this man, whose name is lost to antiquity, who mentioned Buttercup to the Count. The land of Florin was set between where Sweden and Germany would eventually settle. This was before Europe. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharin and his second wife, the Queen. But in fact, the king was barely hanging on, could only rarely tell day from night, and basically spent his time muttering. Prince Humperdinck actually ran things. If there had been a Europe, he would have been the most powerful man in it. Even as it was, nobody within 1,000 miles wanted to mess with him. The Count was Prince Humperdinck's only confidant. His last name was Rugen. The Countess was considerably younger than her husband. All of her clothes came from Paris. This was after Paris, and she had superb taste. This was after taste, too, but only just. And since it was such a new thing, and since the Countess was the only lady in all Florin to possess it, is it any wonder she was the leading hostess of the land? In sum, the Rugens were couple of the week in Florin, and had been for many years. "Quick, quick, come!" Buttercup's father stood in his farmhouse, staring out the window. Buttercup came close and stood behind her mother and father, and soon she was gasping, because the Count and the Countess and all their pages and servants were passing by the cart track in front of the farm. "What could they want to see me about?" Buttercup's father said. Go see, Buttercup's mother told him. "You go, please. We'll both go." They both went. "Cows," the Count said, when they reached his golden carriage. I would like to talk to you about cows. You see, I'm thinking of starting a little dairy of my own, and since your cows are known throughout the land as being Floren's finest, I thought I might pry your secrets from you." Buttercup's father turned to his wife. "What would you say my secret is, dear?" "Oh, there are so many," she said. She was no dummy, not when it came to the quality of their livestock. "You two are childless, are you?" the Count asked them. "No, sir," the mother answered. "Then let me see her," the Count went on. "Perhaps she will be quicker with her answers than her parents. Buttercup, come out, please." Buttercup moved into view, hurrying from the house to her parents. The Count left the carriage. Gracefully he moved to the ground and stood very still. He was a big man with black hair and black eyes and great shoulders and a black cape and gloves. "Curtsy, dear," Buttercup's mother whispered. Buttercup did her best, and the Count could not stop looking at her. Understand now, she was barely rated in the top 20. Her hair was uncombed, unclean. Her age was just 17, so there was still in occasional places the remains of baby fat. Nothing was really there but potential, but the Count could not rip his eyes away. "The Count would like to know the secrets of our cow's greatness. Is that correct, sir?" Buttercup's father said. "Ask the farm boy. He tends them," Buttercup said. "And is that the farm boy?" came a new voice from inside the carriage. Then the Countess's face was framed in the carriage doorway. Buttercup's father glanced back toward the lone figure peering around the corner in the house. "It is." "You," the Countess called out. "Come here." The farm boy did as he was told. And when he was close, the Countess left the carriage. "Have you a name, farm boy?" "Wesley, Countess." "Well, Wesley, perhaps you can help us with our problem. We are all of us here passionately interested in the subject of cows. Why do you suppose, Wesley, that the cows of this particular farm are the finest in all Floren? What do you do to them?" "I just feed them, Countess." "Well, then, there it is. The mystery's solved. Clearly the magic is in Wesley's feeding. Show me how you do it, would you, Wesley?" So off they went to the cowshed. Throughout all this, the Count kept watching Buttercup. "I'll help you," Buttercup called after Wesley. "Perhaps I'd best see just how he does it," the Count decided. "Strange things are happening," Buttercup's parents said, watching the Count, who was watching their daughter, who was watching the Countess, who was watching Wesley. That night, Buttercup went to her room. She lay on her bed, and she closed her eyes. And the Countess was staring at Wesley. Buttercup got up from bed. She took off her clothes, she washed a little, she got into her nightgown, she slipped between the sheets, snuggled down, closed her eyes. The Countess would not stop staring at Wesley. Why? The farm boy had eyes like the sea before a storm, but who cared about eyes? And he had pale blonde hair, if you like that sort of thing. And certainly he was muscular, but anybody would be muscular who slaved all day. "Oh," Buttercup gasped. "Oh, oh, dear." Now the farm boy was staring back at the Countess. Buttercup jumped out of bed and began to pace her room. How could he? Oh, it was all right if he looked at her, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at her. Flailing and thrashing, Buttercup wept and tossed and paced and wept some more. And there have been 3 great cases of jealousy since David of Galilee was first afflicted with the emotion when he could no longer stand the fact that his neighbor Saul's cactus outshone his own. Buttercup's case ranked a close 4th on the all-time list. She was outside his hovel before dawn. She knocked. He appeared, stood in the doorway. He waited. She looked at him. Then she looked away. He was too beautiful. "I love you," Buttercup said. "I know this must come as something of a surprise, since all I've ever done is scorn you and degrade you and taunt you, but I have loved you for several hours now, and every second more. Dearest Wesley, I've never called you that before, have I? Wesley, 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 darling Wesley, sweet, perfect Wesley, whisper that I have a chance to win your love." And with that, she dared the bravest thing she'd ever done. She looked right into his eyes. He closed the door in her face. Buttercup ran. She whirled and burst away, and the tears came bitterly. She could not see. She stumbled. She slammed into a tree trunk, fell, rose, ran on. Back to her room she fled, back to her pillow. Safe behind the locked door, she drenched the world with tears. It was dusk when she heard footsteps outside her door, then a knock. Whoever is that? Wesley. Buttercup went to a door, unlocked it, and said in her fanciest tone, I'm ever so glad you stopped by. I've been feeling just ever so slummy about the little joke I played on you this morning. Of course, you knew I wasn't for a moment serious. I've come to say goodbye. I'm leaving. Leaving? She held to the doorframe. Now? Yes. Because of what I said this morning? Yes. I frightened you away, didn't I? I could kill my tongue. I'm going to America to seek my fortune. This was just after America, but long after fortunes. Do you love me, Wesley? Is that it? He couldn't believe it. Do I love you? I have stayed these years in my hovel because of you. I have made my body strong because I thought you might be pleased by a strong body. I have not known a moment in years when the sight of you did not send my heart careening against my rib cage. If you're teasing me, Wesley, I'm just going to kill you. How can you even dream I might be teasing? Well, you haven't once said you loved me. I've been saying it so long to you. You just wouldn't listen. Every time you said, Farm boy, do this, you thought I was answering as you wish. But that's only because you were hearing wrong. I love you was what it was, but you never heard. I hear you now, and I promise you this. I will never love anyone else, only Wesley, until I die. He nodded, took a step away. I'll send for you soon, believe me. He reached out his right hand. Buttercup found it very hard to breathe. She managed to raise her right hand to his. They shook. Goodbye, he said. She made a little nod. He took a third step, not turning. She watched him. He turned, and the words ripped out of her. Without one kiss? They fell into each other's arms. The first morning after Wesley's departure, Buttercup thought she was entitled to do nothing more than sit around moping and feeling sorry for herself. But she realized that Wesley was out in the world now, and what if a beautiful city girl caught his fancy while she was just back here moldering? She ran downstairs to her parents. What can I do to improve my personal appearance? Start by bathing, her father said. And do something with your hair while you're at it, her mother said. That will do nicely for starters, Buttercup said. Gracious, but it isn't easy being tidy. Undaunted, she set to work. Her hair was the color of autumn, and had never been cut, so 1,000 strokes took time. But she didn't mind, because Wesley had never seen it clean like this, and wouldn't he be surprised when she stepped off the boat in America? Her skin was the color of wintry cream, and she scrubbed her every inch well past glistening. And that wasn't much fun, really, but wouldn't Wesley be pleased with how clean she was as she stepped off the boat in America? And very quickly now, her potential began to be realized. Her love for Wesley would not stop growing, which was why Wesley's death hit her the way it did. She had come home from delivering the milk, and her parents were wooden. Off the Carolina coast, her father whispered. Her mother whispered, without warning, at night. What? From Buttercup. Pirates, said her father. He's been taken prisoner, then? Buttercup managed. It was Roberts, her father said. The dread pirate Roberts. Oh, Buttercup said. The one who never leaves survivors. She stayed in her room many days. At first her parents tried to lure her, but she would not have it. They took to leaving food outside her room, and she took bits and shreds enough to stay alive. And when at last she came out, her eyes were dry. Her parents stared up from their silent breakfast at her. They both started to rise, but she put a hand out, stopped them. I can care for myself, please. And she set about getting some food. They watched her closely. In point of fact, she had never looked as well. She had entered her room as just an impossibly lovely girl. The woman who emerged was a trifle thinner, a great deal wiser, and an ocean sadder. This one understood the nature of pain, and beneath the glory of her features there was character and a sure knowledge of suffering. She was 18. She was the most beautiful woman in 100 years. She didn't seem to care. You all right? Her mother asked. Yes, Buttercup replied. There was a very long pause. But I will never love again. she never did. Prince Humperdinck was shaped like a barrel. His chest was a great barrel chest, his thighs mighty barrel thighs. He was not tall, but he weighed close to 250 pounds, brick hard. He walked like a crab side to side, and probably if he had wanted to be a ballet dancer, he would have been doomed to a miserable life of endless frustration. But he didn't want to be a ballet dancer. He wasn't in that much of a hurry to be a king either. Even war, at which he excelled, took second place in his affections. Hunting was his love. In the beginning, he traversed the world for opposition, but travel consumed time, ships and horses being what they were, and the time away from Florin was worrying. There always had to be a male heir to the throne, and as long as his father was alive, there was no problem. But someday his father would die, and then the prince would be the king, and he would have to select a queen to supply an heir for the day of his own death. So to avoid the problem of absence, Prince Humperdinck built the Zoo of Death. It was underground. The prince picked the spot himself in the quietest, remotest corner of the castle grounds, and he decreed there were to be 5 levels, all with the proper needs for his individual enemies. On the first level, he put enemies of speed, wild dogs, cheetahs, hummingbirds. On the second level belonged the enemies of strength, anacondas and rhinos and crocodiles of over 20 feet. The third level was for poisoners, spitting cobras, jumping spiders, death bats galore. The fourth level was the kingdom of the most dangerous, the enemies of fear, the shrieking tarantula, the blood eagle, plus, in its own black pool, the sucking squid. The fifth level was empty. The prince constructed it in the hopes of someday finding something worthy, something as dangerous and fierce and powerful as he was. He was ringing down the curtain on an orangutan when the business of the king's health made its ultimate intrusion. It was mid-afternoon, and the prince had been grappling with the giant beast since morning, and finally, after all these hours, the hairy thing was weakening. Count Rugen's voice interrupted. "There is news," the count said. From battle, the prince replied, "Cannot it wait?" "For how long?" asked the count. Crack! The orangutan fell like a rag doll. "Now, what is all this?" the prince replied, stepping past the dead beast, mounting the ladder out of the pit. "Your father has had his annual physical," the count said. "I have the report. And? Your father is dying." "Drat," said the prince. "That means I shall have to get married. I want someone who is so beautiful that when you see her you say, 'Wow, that Humperdinck must be some kind of fella to have a wife like that.' Search the country, search the world, just find her." Count Rugen could only smile. "She is already found," he said. It was dawn when the 2 horsemen reined in at the hilltop. Count Rugen rode a splendid black horse, large, perfect, powerful. The prince rode one of his whites. "She delivers milk in the mornings," Count Rugen said. "And she is truly, without question, no possibility of error beautiful?" "She was something of a mess when I saw her," the count admitted, "but the potential was overwhelming." "A milkmaid." The prince ran the words across his rough tongue. "I don't know that I could wed one of them, even under the best conditions. People might snicker that she was the best I could do." "True," the count admitted. "If you prefer, we can ride back to Florence City without waiting." "Well, we've come this far," the prince said. "We might as well, His voice quite simply died. "I'll take her," he managed, finally, as Buttercup rode by below them. "No one will snicker, I think," the count said. "I must court her now," the prince said. "Leave us alone for a minute." He rode the white expertly down the hill. Buttercup had never seen such a giant beast, or such a rider. "I am your prince, and you will marry me," Humperdinck said. Buttercup whispered, "I am your servant, and I refuse." "I am your prince, and you cannot refuse." "I am your loyal servant, and I just did." "Refusal means death." "Kill me, then." "I am your prince, and I'm not that bad. How could you rather be dead than married to me?" "Because," Buttercup said, "marriage involves love, and this is not a pastime at which I excel. I tried once, and it went badly, and I am sworn never to love another." "Love," said Prince Humperdinck. "Who mentioned love? Not me, I can tell you. Look, there must always be a male heir to the throne of Florin. Once my father dies, there won't be an heir, just a king. When that happens, I'll marry and have children until there is a son. So you can either marry me, and be the richest and most powerful woman in 1,000 miles and give away turkeys at Christmas and provide me a son, or you can die in terrible pain in the very near future. Make up your own mind. I'll never love you. I wouldn't want it if I had it. Then by all means let us marry. The great square of Florence City was filled as never before, awaiting the introduction of Prince Humperdinck's bride-to-be, Princess Buttercup of Hammersmith. At noontime, Prince Humperdinck appeared at the balcony of his father's castle and raised his arms. In 3 months, our country celebrates its 500th anniversary. To celebrate that celebration, I shall, on that sundown, take for my wife the Princess Buttercup of Hammersmith. You do not know her yet, but you will meet her now. And he made a sweeping gesture, and the balcony doors swung open, and Buttercup moved out beside him on the balcony. And the crowd quite literally gasped. The 21-year-old princess far surpassed the 18-year-old mourner. Her figure faults were gone, the too bony elbow having fleshed out nicely. The opposite pudgy wrist could not have been trimmer. Prince Humperdinck took her hand and held it high, and the crowd cheered. That's enough. Mustn't risk overexposure, the prince said, and he started back in toward the castle. They have waited, some of them, so long, Buttercup answered. I would like to walk among them. And with that she left the balcony, reappeared a moment later on the great steps of the castle, and quite alone walked open-armed down into the crowd. Most of the people there would never forget that day. None of them, of course, have ever been so close to perfection, and the great majority adored her instantly. There were, to be sure, some who, while admitting she was pleasing enough, were withholding judgment as to her quality as a queen. And of course there were some more who were frankly jealous. Very few of them hated her, and only 3 of them were planning to murder her. Buttercup naturally knew none of this. She was smiling, and when people wanted to touch her gown, well, she let them. And when they wanted to brush their skin against hers, well, she let them do that too. She had studied hard to do things royally, and she wanted very much to succeed. So she kept her posture erect and her smile gentle, and that her death was so close would have only made her laugh if someone had told her. But in the farthest corner of the great square, in the highest building in the land, deep in the deepest shadow, the man in black stood waiting. His boots were black and leather, his pants were black, and his shirt. His mask was black, blacker than raven, but the blackest of all were his flashing eyes, flashing and cruel and deadly. Buttercup was more than a little weary after her triumph. The touching of the crowds had exhausted her, so she rested a bit, and then toward mid-afternoon she changed into her riding clothes and went to fetch horse. She still loved to ride, and every afternoon, weather permitting or not, she rode alone for several hours in the wild land before the castle. Dusk was closing in when Buttercup crested the hill. She was perhaps half an hour from the castle, and her daily ride was 3/4 done. Suddenly she reined horse, for standing in the dimness beyond was the strangest trio she had ever seen. The man in front was dark, a Sicilian perhaps, with the gentlest face, almost angelic. He had one leg too short, and the makings of a humpback, but he moved forward toward her with surprising speed and nimbleness. The other 2 remained rooted. The second, also dark, probably Spanish, was as erect and slender as the blade of steel that was attached to his side. The third, mustached, perhaps a Turk, was easily the biggest human being she had ever seen. We are but poor circus performers, the Sicilian explained. It is dark, and we are lost. We were told there was a village nearby that might enjoy our skills. You were misinformed, Buttercup told him. There is no one, not for many miles. Then there will be no one to hear you scream, the Sicilian said, and he jumped with frightening agility toward her face. That was all Buttercup remembered. His hands expertly touched places on her neck, and unconsciousness came. She woke to the lapping of water. She was wrapped in a blanket, and the giant Turk was putting her in the bottom of a boat. I think you should kill her now, the Turk said. The less you think, the happier I'll be, the Sicilian answered. She must be found dead on the Guilder frontier, or we will not be paid the remainder of our fee. Is that clear enough for you? I just feel better when I know what's going on, that's all, the Turk mumbled. People are always thinking I'm so stupid because I'm big and strong and sometimes drool a little when I get excited. The reason people think you're stupid, the Sicilian said, is because you are stupid. It has nothing to do with your drooling. Watch your heads, the Spaniard cautioned, and then the boat was moving. The people of Florin will not take her death well, I should think. She has become beloved. There will be war, the Sicilian agreed. We have been paid to start it. It's a fine line of work to be expert in. If we do this perfectly, there will be continual demand for our services. Well, I don't like it all that much, the Spaniard said. Frankly, I wish you'd have refused. The offer was too high. I don't like killing a girl, the Spaniard said. God does it all the time. It doesn't bother him. Don't let it worry you. The Spaniard said, let's just tell her we're taking her away for ransom. The Turk agreed. She's so beautiful, and she'd go all crazy if she knew. She knows already, the Sicilian said. She's been awake for every word of this. How can you be sure, the Spaniard asked. The Sicilian senses all, the Sicilian said. Conceited, Buttercup thought. Yes, very conceited, the Sicilian thought. The Sicilian stared ahead. There, the cliffs of insanity. And there they were, rising straight and sheer from the water 1,000 feet into the night. They provided the most direct route between Florin and Guilder, but no one had ever used them, sailing instead the long way, many miles around. Sail straight for the steepest part, the Sicilian commanded. Buttercup did not understand. Going up the cliffs could hardly be done, she thought, and no one ever mentioned secret passages through them. Yet there they were, sailing closer and closer to the mighty rocks, now surely less than a quarter mile away. But for the first time the Sicilian allowed himself a smile. All is well. We are miles ahead of anybody, and safe, safe, safe. No one could be following us yet, the Spaniard asked. No one, the Sicilian assured him. It would be inconceivable. Absolutely inconceivable? Absolutely, totally, and in all other ways inconceivable, the Sicilian reassured him. Why do you ask? No reason, the Spaniard replied. It's only that I just happened to look back and something's there. Something was indeed there. Less than a mile behind them, across the moonlight, was another sailing boat with a giant sail that billowed black in the night, and a single man at the tiller, a man in black. The Spaniard looked at the Sicilian. It must just be some local fisherman out for a pleasure cruise alone at night through shark-infested waters. He's gaining on us, the Turk said. That is also inconceivable, the Sicilian said. Before I stole this boat we're in, I made many inquiries as to what was the fastest ship in all Florin Channel, and everyone agreed it was this one. You're right, the Turk agreed, staring back. He isn't gaining on us. He's just getting closer, that's all. The cliffs of insanity were very close now. The humpback bounded forward, and as the ship reached the cliff face, he jumped up, and suddenly there was a rope in his hand. Buttercup stared in silent astonishment. The rope, thick and strong, seemed to travel all the way up the cliffs. As she watched, the Sicilian pulled at the rope again and again, and it held firm. It was attached to something at the top, a giant rock, a towering tree, something. Fast now, the Sicilian ordered. If he's following us, which of course is not within the realm of human experience, but if he is, we've got to reach the top and cut the rope off before he can climb up after us. And then everyone got busy. The Spaniard took a rope, tied Buttercup's hands and feet. The Turk raised a giant leg and stomped down on the center of the boat, which gave way immediately and began to sink. Then the Turk went to the rope and took it in his hands. Load me, the Turk said. The Spaniard lifted Buttercup and draped her body around the Turk's shoulders. Then he tied himself to the Turk's waist. Then the Sicilian hopped, clung to the Turk's neck. The Turk began to climb. It was at least 1,000 feet, and he was carrying the three, but he was not worried. When it came to power, nothing worried him. When it came to reading, he got knots in the middle of his stomach, and when it came to writing, he broke out in a cold sweat. But strength had never been his enemy. His might lay in his arms. There had never, and not in 1,000 years, been arms to match Fezzik's, for that was his name. The arms were not only gargantuan and totally obedient and surprisingly quick, but they were also, and this was why he never worried, tireless. And so even with the Sicilian on his neck and the princess around his shoulders and the Spaniard at his waist, Fezzik did not feel in the least bit put upon. He was actually quite happy, because it was only when he was requested to use his might that he felt he wasn't a bother to everybody. The man in black was still there, sailing like lightning toward the cliffs. He could not have been more than a quarter mile from them now. Faster, the Sicilian commanded. He's left his boat behind, the Spaniard said. He's jumped onto our rope. He's starting up after us. I can feel him, Fezzik said. His body weight on the rope. He'll never catch up, the Sicilian cried. Inconceivable. You keep using that word, the Spaniard cried. I don't think it means what you think it does. How fast is he climbing? Fezzik said. The Sicilian gathered his courage again and looked down. The man in black seemed almost to be flying. Already he had cut their lead 100 feet, perhaps more. I thought you were supposed to be so strong, the Sicilian shouted. I thought you were this great, mighty thing, and yet he gains. I'm carrying 3 people, Fezzik explained. He has only himself, and... Fly, Fezzik, the Sicilian screamed. Fezzik flew. He cleared his mind of everything but ropes and arms and fingers, and his arms pulled and his fingers gripped, and the rope held taut, and... He's over halfway, the Spaniard said. Halfway to doom is where he is, the Sicilian said. We're 50 feet from safety, and once we're there, I untie the rope. He allowed himself to laugh. 40 feet. Fezzik pulled. 20. 10. It was over. Fezzik had done it. They had reached the top of the cliffs, and first the Sicilian jumped off, and then the Turk removed the princess. And as the Spaniard untied himself, he looked back over the cliffs. The man in black was no more than 300 feet away. The Sicilian untied the rope from its knots around an oak. The rope seemed almost alive, the greatest of all water serpents, heading at last for home. It whipped across the cliff tops, spiraled into the moonlit channel. The Sicilian was roaring now, and he kept at it until the Spaniard had said, "He did it." "Did what?" The humpback came scurrying to the cliff edge. "Release the rope in time," the Spaniard said. "See?" He pointed down. The man in black was hanging in space, clinging to the sheer rock face, 700 feet above the water. "He can't hold on much longer," the Sicilian said. "He has to fall soon." It was at that moment that the man in black began to climb. Not quickly, of course, and not without great effort, but still there was no doubt that he was, in spite of the sheerness of the cliffs, heading in an upward direction. "Inconceivable!" the Sicilian cried. The Spaniard whirled on him. "Stop saying that word!" The Sicilian advanced on the Spaniard now, his wild eyes glittering at the insubordination. "The man in black is not following us. A more logical explanation would be that he is simply an ordinary sailor who dabbles in mountain climbing as a hobby, who happens to have the same general final destination as we do. In any case, we cannot take the risk of his seeing us with the princess, and therefore one of you must kill him." "Shall I do it?" the Turk wondered. The Sicilian shook his head. "No, Fezzik," he said finally. "I need your strength to carry the girl. Pick her up now, and let us hurry along." He turned to the Spaniard. "We'll be heading directly for the frontier of Gilder. Catch up as quickly as you can once he's dead." The Spaniard nodded. The Sicilian hobbled away. The Turk hoisted the princess, began following the humpback. The Spaniard waved. "Farewell, Fezzik." "Farewell, Inigo," the Turk replied. And then he was gone, and the Spaniard was alone. End of Side 1.